Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining. This is the second edition of the Flexera FinOps Best Practice series, and I'll just step through a little bit, and we'll get onto the agenda in just a moment. But the focus of this one is in two parts, but we'll do that in just a sec. First and foremost, I would like to ask if you would be willing to share your experience with Gartner. We appreciate you being valued customers, and we would like your help in informing Gartner and everybody else what your experience is like using Flexera, particularly CCO in this case, and the FinOps piece, but more broadly as well. So this is completely anonymous. It's not lengthy. So unlike some surveys that you get in and then they say it's 5 minutes, it's going to be 30. This really is quite short. So about 10 minutes of your time is typically what it takes. So that would be great if you could do that. It helps other professionals gain experience from you and your experiences as well. So we would really appreciate that. And as a token of appreciation, when you complete it, you can select to receive a voucher for $25. Not quite sure how that's delivered, but there is something that comes your way by way of thanks for taking a bit of time out of your day to complete that. So scan the code. We can come back to that at the end if you like, but we really would appreciate your opinions. So for today, we've got some guest presenters with us today. I'll introduce those in just a sec. Just really wanted to recap where we were. So on the previous session, we were looking at end-to-end FinOps. So we were talking about engagement from the business level right down to engineering, including product, finance, and procurement in amongst all of that, and understanding what a route to good FinOps might look like in terms of engagement and things like that. Now, I mean, arguably, we're on to assuming you've been able to ingest your cost and allocate your cost. The next thing to do is to start to try and improve your cost position against your use. And one of the big ways of doing that is rate optimization or commitment management. So reserved instances savings plans, and we'll kind of, for the purposes today, we might bundle in spot to that, although it's not really a commitment, I guess. So that's where we're going to be heading today. But in amongst that, first off, we are doing a little piece of closing the gap. So the FinOps Foundation, in the previous iteration of the update to the framework, introduced ITAM as an allied persona, and that is to cover essentially software license management for the most part. There's going to be future updates coming to the framework as well. So the 2025 updates will be arriving shortly, but this will remain. So when you see ITAM as an allied persona, this is part of it, and we'll just touch on that a little bit. And then the main purpose of today's session is around commitments and commitment best practice. And if I just quickly move on now, if I can. And I can. So today got a panel, myself, Sam Barbeau, FinOps advisor, like myself. You'll probably appreciate that we acquired Spot from NetApp, which is great. And we're lucky enough to have Donald here to help us with talking about reservations and reservation management. And Gurpal will be here to if needed, chip in on some of the wider product range from Spot as it pertains to reservations, FinOps best practice, and closing the visibility gaps and the action gaps. So CLM, Cloud License Management, is a new product, but more importantly, it's the reason for that appearing. And the reason for that appearing, and the FinOps Foundation have recognized it, Gartner and Forrester have recognized it, is that in order to get the best value in terms of your licensing and your license position, if you're consuming pay-as-you-go licensing from cloud, is to understand what your position might be with any on-prem or other existing licensing that you may have, and then so really reconciling what your position looks like in the cloud and what your position looks like on-prem. Do you have any spare capacity that can be utilized? And as I say, Flexera recognized this some years ago, and it's really been recognized by the market now, and the potential savings are significant. From this chart's point of view, its respondents to the ITFM and FinOps top partners, ITAM is increasingly unifying with FinOps, and sustainability, kind of a little bit behind that. So, the market is coming together with this. The number of organizations that are responding to the FinOps Foundation's State of FinOps reports are also saying that there's certainly collaboration between teams if the teams aren't directly converging. From our point of view, from a best practice, it's not about teams converging necessarily, but it is about collaboration, and that collaboration comes through visibility. So if you think about the inform, optimize, and operate, that's really where we're really interested in closing that gap, being able to inform you of your position in the two different places, and bring the value of that, being able to exercise any spare capacity in the cloud to deliver some value. And to that end, if I could hand over to Sam, feel free to introduce yourself as you go through, just to talk a little bit more about CLM, why it's important, and the value that we can bring in that area.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. We'll just go to the next slide here. As Jonathan mentioned, part of our FinOps advisory group alongside himself here in North America, based in Charlotte, North Carolina. If anyone's local, reach out. One of the things we'll be covering today is just as Jonathan mentioned, not necessarily the convergence, but the collaboration and the alignment of some of these allied personas. And what does this look like when we start thinking about our own day-to-day lives, right? How does cloud software, cloud licensing really impact our day-to-day FinOps practice? And it really kind of depends on how you're leveraging software today. So if you're just migrating to the cloud, if you're standing up new workloads in the cloud, this may look like in the top right, your initial decision when spinning up infrastructure, right? You've established what compute you need, you've established what operating system and what software running on this workload you need, like SQL Server, and you're prompted with a decision from the get-go on, do I leverage the license included, or do I apply my Azure hybrid use benefit? And in most instances, at least so far in what we're seeing, organizations don't have kind of a standard policy in place yet to say, leverage my bring your own license program, in this case, hybrid use benefit, as the de facto for spinning up new workloads, right? Most organizations are going to be in this position of, well, I don't know, or I'm just a delivery resource spinning up these instances to get this project or this workload running, and I'm just going to go license included. And what that means is right out of the gate, we're making a decision, a commitment to essentially spend more for this workload than is potentially necessary. And I say potentially because it kind of depends on your configuration and in what workload configuration you're running. So in this case alone, and I don't know if you can see it, but in this case alone, a good 80-90% of the cost of running this workload is now software and the licensing required from a Windows Server perspective, from SQL Server perspective. You're now on the hook for that. And this impacts not just your cloud spend and realizing value from that, but it also potentially impacts your license position as well. And so from a SAM and ITAM perspective, working with those individuals, they're going to need at scale visibility into where your kind of essentially, teams are signing up for additional licenses that could have a kind of compliance implication. And inversely, if your default standard is to apply bring your own license, wherever and however possible, and you're leveraging that hybrid use benefits program in this example for Microsoft, then are we over applying bring your own license from a consumption perspective, and capacity is running short or already in a shortfall for what we're leveraging in the cloud and already leveraging on-prem? And so these are decisions that individually we make them, and the impact is small, right? It's like the pebble and the brick wall analogy, right? It's an individual event that in isolation is small, but at scale can yield significant challenges. And what we're driving here is an optimization through visibility, through insights, to remove that pebble from the brick wall and have a smooth experience in the cloud, and a smooth experience for ITAM. So how and where you deploy software matters, right? It's significantly higher on the lift and shift approach, where the encouragement is to go kind of cloud as quickly as possible for workloads. And there's maybe a business case done on resizing some of the infrastructure, but not looking at what licenses you're now bringing in and leveraging in the cloud. We've been talking about hybrid use benefits just in this particular example, but the same exists for Oracle. How you're leveraging Oracle databases, on an on-prem server versus in cloud versus containerized. Significant differences in the cost back to the business, and it's all in those kind of nuanced licensing terms and conditions that fortunately Flexera has the capabilities to make that even more clear for your ITAM practitioners as well. And so we're going to jump into a brief demonstration of cloud license management. It's a new set of capabilities by Flexera, and we will take about 10-15 minutes navigating the platform.
Just while you're doing that, just to mention that the QR code, if you wanted to get to some product information about this, you can take a quick scan of that. That will get you there. And if you have questions, please post them in the Q&A section or the chat section, and we will endeavor to answer them there and mention them on the webinar as well. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jonathan. Good call out for the QR code. And we'll show that back once we get through the demonstration as well. So upon entry, we're met with a set of visualizations supported by embedded Power BI. All of this is running on our technology intelligence platform, which is where the FinOps platform and the ITAM entitlement data are starting to kind of coalesce. And what we see right out of the gate is that there is a substantial amount of cloud spend, but there's a significant portion of that is currently running as pay-as-you-go software spend. And so one of the things that makes this unique from a capability perspective is the ability to extrapolate from your total cloud spend, whether it's in AWS or in Azure, extrapolate from that what of your total cloud spend is marketplace. So what's being purchased via the marketplace. A lot of procurement teams, a lot of finance teams are needing to get better visibility there. So this is supported by that. And then also extrapolating that software spend on top of the compute. And so being able to carve that out has been historically difficult, especially at scale, where historically you've looked at your compute and storage, kind of everything together, pulling out that software spend specifically. And then we also do a kind of look back of 30 days to see where's the potential savings in our current environment, current ecosystem, where there are bring your own license programs. And so we've talked about hybrid use benefits with Azure. We'll talk about a few others here in a moment. But you can also see this historical data. So because we're pulling in cloud billing information over time, we can see if I hover over at any given point over the past year, what our cloud spend was. And so we can have better historical values tracked both for our compute and software spend so that we can do better forecasting. And so we're not just pulling in the cost details, but the consumption and the number of running instances at that time as well. Everything that we're seeing here is available in an export as well, or for your own custom kind of report generation. So allows us to do that kind of upper and lower bound forecast models for the software spend and compute spend. So in addition to getting visibility of spend at an aggregate level, understanding where that is maybe by cost center or by line of business, or however you do your cost allocation today, we drive that visibility within the platform so that you can see the disposition, of spend by cost center here. That's really helpful as you start to optimize, going to these organizations and saying, we have some software optimization opportunities within your organization based on your utilization of these workloads. Let's talk about your current and future plans from a roadmap perspective. And maybe based on, excess capacity, we pull some of these bring your own licenses back and reapply them to other parts of the business that are potentially, needing some additional savings through leveraging bring your own license. So it's a little bit of a give forget. And having that visibility is crucial. Software spend by manufacturer, by provider, these are going to be pretty self-explanatory. So we support a number of manufacturers today, Microsoft, Oracle, Red Hat as some examples. And then by provider, AWS and Azure today, with the intent to roll out GCP towards the end of the year. And so that'll be supported as well. If we were to go by manufacturer or by product, this further helps prioritize where there are opportunities to optimize. And so same navigation experience through one or the other. We're just going to jump into the product level first. And it helps us as we sit down and understand how we start to tackle these challenges of excess spend or non-optimally applied license models, where to begin that journey. And so for the demo data that we're looking at, right, if we wanted to understand the biggest opportunity segment, that would be our Windows Server and then followed up by SQL Server Enterprise. And this is not surprising. Most organizations that we've seen, and we've kind of polled all of our FinOps customers today, the vast majority of spend today is represented in these two products alone. And that's a substantial amount of the overall cloud spend. So a good 5% of the overall cloud spend under Flexera management alone is just the Windows Server and SQL Server software costs. And so that's again, a significant amount when you start thinking about the billions under spend management. If we break that down further into the different product types, we can see Windows Server here. We can see the SQL Server below. And this is, again, furthering that discussion of I, as a practitioner, need to focus my efforts on what's going to yield the biggest return first. Where do I begin, right? If I'm looking at databases, that would be SQL Server here. We can see our total software and compute spend. We can see that broken out by what's running in AWS versus what's running in Azure, and then what that potential savings is on a monthly or trailing 30-day basis. Because this is a larger opportunity pie than the Windows Server, I just right-click and I drill through, which Power BI lets us accomplish, and we can start to investigate this information quite a bit further. Provides us an overview of, again, what are those savings potentials over the last 30 days, and then where we're already applying bring your own license, what are those realized savings as well. And so as practitioners, you're going to have KPIs to kind of align your practice to and realize savings of usage reduction opportunities would be one of them. And so this would directly support and contribute to that KPI that you and your teams may track against on a regular basis, maybe on a monthly basis. We see some other things here around kind of percent of overall cloud spend total. What is that software spend, again, broken out now at the SQL Server level out of that total cloud spend, and then some other high-level cards around, compute, potential savings, realized savings, et cetera. So SQL Server in Azure, so in our Azure cloud, we see leveraging bring your own license more than in AWS. It's a bit of a not misnomer, but maybe not as commonly known, but you can run SQL Server inside of AWS in a bring your own license capacity and save upwards of 50% your cloud spend, which is substantial, right? Certainly if worthwhile, I would action on that as well. And so we see here realized savings, about $10,000, potential savings being $212,000. To understand the complexities behind this, we need to bring in the entitlement data from our ITAM capabilities as well. And so we, being Flexera's Flexera One platform is a modular solution, we're bringing in all the product use rights and rules and all the contracts that an organization has, and pulling over that entitlement data. So we're understanding what's being consumed today, what the current capacity is for bring your own license models, where you can leverage licenses in the cloud, right? Whether that's opted into or not from a contract perspective. And that context allows us to drive the conversation with not just FinOps practitioners, but ITAM practitioners as well on, yes, there are bring your own license opportunities, but do I have the entitlements available to actually action on them? And this one page allows us to quickly see, yes, I have eligibility for bring your own license in the cloud, 216 opportunities to save money. And I have enough entitlements available in ITAM to action on those 216 opportunities. And so this is a great statistic. What we don't want to see is a negative variance, right? We don't want to see a shortfall. That gives us a different path now that we would need to take with a ITAM practitioner to start looking at ongoing kind of compliance visibility. But from a FinOps practitioner perspective, that you have enough kind of quote tokens in the machine to go out and take advantage of these bring your own license opportunities. You can also see what you're currently consuming from a bring your own license perspective. So contributing to that realized savings number, along with your bring your own license entitlements balance as well. And so this gives us a daily tracker of what is eligible and what is consumed. So eligible would be in orange, consumed is in blue. And again, pulling in that billing data on a daily basis, pulling that entitlement information and context over on a daily basis gives us a fidelity at a much higher granularity and frequency than perhaps the quarterly or annual manual review that was being done, if that, reconciling licenses consumed in the cloud and what's available on-prem. We look at here then the resources page itself to look at the underlying data supporting these facts and figures that we're looking at. These bold recommendations of where you can save hundreds of thousands of dollars on a monthly basis. Where does that come from? And that comes from our collecting the and extrapolating from the cloud bills, the CURs and the exports, information like your current core count, vCPUs, what is the current license model for those workloads? Is it pay as you go? Is it bring your own license or bring your own support? Is it eligible for a bring your own license, right? Some systems aren't eligible for that. What is the hourly price and the usage of that workload? So now we start to look at recommendations of, am I applying bring your own license? Say we flip the script and it's not pay as you go, it's bring your own license. Are there bring your own license entitlements being consumed on workloads that are not optimally licensed and the consumption is really low, or you have the system that's running very intermittently and it's very ephemeral, and maybe that workload is better suited for pay as you go because it is at the end of the day more cost effective than tying up a bring your own license entitlement that could be better suited for a behemoth of a system like this top system here, this $265,000 of software spend. And so this provides that recommendation both ways of where you're pay as you go and can leverage or bring your own license, but where you're currently applying bring your own license, maybe out of a policy to just wherever possible apply bring your own license, that is non-optimally applied. And you should instead switch back to a pay as you go system, whether it's because it's a dynamic ephemeral workload or the utilization is very low, or it doesn't meet the kind of license requirement, right? Again, because there's license requirements when applying these SQL Server and Windows Server hybrid use benefits. And then it provides some additional information around, resource ID, the account ID, on the specific service and cost center in question. And so it provides that fidelity and transparency that you, a practitioner, would need to drive, optimization outcomes. License model is going to be a higher level view where you can get in and understand how much of my environment today is bring your own support versus pay as you go versus bring your own license. And again, shows, where a lot of that opportunity lands today in terms of pay as you go, and instead leveraging a bring your own license or BYOL model. And then it also shows cloud instances by cloud service. So what service is the lion's share of these opportunities falling on? In this case, Amazon EC2 or Microsoft Compute. And then the software spend by product. So again, further prioritizing your efforts. This is a good kind of getting started guide for how to consume the data that you're seeing, what's coming up in terms of a product release and feature release, from potential savings, how we're tracking realized savings, and then what cloud providers are coming up in support as well. So with that, we will hand it back over to Jonathan. If there are any questions, please feel free to include them in chat, and we can certainly kind of cover them off throughout the rest of the call, or we can follow up to go through this in more detail as need be.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll share the deck again. There are a couple of questions in the chat. Just before we get to those and move on, though, in the interests of kind of the best practice bit as a FinOps practitioner, being able to have the visibility and work with your colleagues in the software asset management and ITAM side is, really important. So, that was obviously a product view, but from a practitioner point of view, being able to understand the potential benefit of having that information and being able to bring the two sides together is something that really is a great opportunity to leverage both skill sets and bring definite monetary value to the organization. So if it's been out of your path, I guess, as a FinOps practitioner, definitely worth making contact with the people in the organization who look after software license management on-prem, and just starting to understand the position that they are, if they have excess licenses, and then understanding what might be an opportunity from a cloud perspective. And regardless of CLM, there are policies that can be run in CCO, in our FinOps tool for Flexera, that will allow you to establish certainly what the potential for hybrid use benefit and things like that are. So you've got tools at your disposal as well to help that conversation along. Speak to your team that are supporting you, or reach out to us. We're always happy to help and guide on that. Okay, so let's just move on a little bit. And next part. So I'll assume that we'll maybe circle back to the chat messages, and if we need to address those as a conversation, we will. For now, just in the interests of time and to keep things moving, we'll move on to commitments. So reservations, savings plans, and a little bit of spot maybe in there as well. So as I was talking about, really important, as you go through the kind of FinOps life cycle and the FinOps progression of acquiring the data, allocating the data, and getting visibility, the next steps are to look at two things. It's rate optimization and use optimization. Rate optimization gives you the ability to do things quickly. It's always been a priority, and it's still a priority. So this is a couple of graphs from the FinOps Foundation's State of FinOps 2024 and 2025 priorities. It's moving down a little bit, but you need to take into consideration that the way the questions are asked by the FinOps Foundation vary over time. and the kind of weighting that's put into those in terms of what's important, in the way the questions are asked, varies a little bit as well. So not a direct comparison from year to year, but what's important is it's still in that top end of what's important. And the reason it's important, of course, is because you can generate significant savings from your pay-as-you-go kind of costs. Whether it's reserved instances, savings plans, or if you're with Google, it's committed use discounts and SUDs, cuts and SUDs, then, really important that this is addressed. I guess everybody on the call will be familiar with the why, but let's do a base set anyway. I know Donald takes issue with this slide, so I'll just address some of his concerns. The process from a practitioner perspective is really that they're quick to implement. Usually, if you're trying to right size something, you need to engage multiple parties. You've got to gather lots of information around, what it's being used for, how it's being used, what the impact might be of changing families or sizes of compute, storage, whatever. Unlike a savings plan or a reserved instance, which can be implemented, no disruption, and the savings are realized immediately. And depending, in most situations, then it's a good thing to do and to get as much coverage as you can. And we'll talk about the different aspects of commitment, buying, and the considerations around it in just a few slides. But, they can be significant. So whether it's 1 year or 3 years, maybe if you've got every single duck lined up, and you're including your EDPs, enterprise discounts, or private pricing agreements, you can start to achieve up to 72% savings on a 3-year reserved instance. Maybe, if it's in the right region and things like that, but maybe not. And Donald, feel free to chip in if you'd like to make a particular point. That would be great.
Just on that, Jonathan, I think when we're speaking beforehand, we're saying these the marketing figures are like Instagram. You just see the best. You see the best number, but it's a very specific set of circumstances. In reality, for 3-year, depending on your mix of operating systems, you're looking at more around the 40 to 50% mark is really, really good in terms of saving. So if you're getting anywhere approaching that, you should feel very, very good about yourself. Like, don't be pushing for these high 60s, high 70s, because they're instance specific all up front, as Jonathan says, maybe take into account your EDP or PPA discount. So shoot for the stars and you'll end up in the clouds kind of a thing. But yeah, 70 or 65%, I'd love to see that.
Yeah, and just some considerations around that as well, and we'll go through more of these, I think, in the discussion that's coming up. And please feel free to post questions in the chat around any of this. We would love to get your opinions as well and roll those into the discussion. But some of the things that often happens, this is a term commitment, and those term commitments often come with more governance. So it may be having discussions with procurement teams and finance to understand who's responsible for the purchase of those. Ideally, those want to be centralized so you can make best use of your purchasing power. And we'll come on to a little bit of that in a slide or two. But you need to have some kind of, or there will be scrutiny to avoid underutilization. You don't want to commit to something that then doesn't get used because you're paying for it anyway. And that in both instances, whether it's a positive one or a negative one, can influence your personal credibility. So, the planning and the research and things and the understanding of the market around reserved instances is really important. And hopefully that's what you'll get some of today, is to have, that kind of checklist of things that are important and the best practice around that. And we may link that back to the product as well, in terms of the whole of Flexera, including Spot and Flexera. So let's go on again. But great opportunities, and how do those break down? well, we're back to this again, 72%, maybe. Realistically, it's going to be, some way less than that, but still important. When you think of the potential cost of instances, then, well, and all the things that can be affected by a reserved instance or a savings plan or a committed use discount, then it's a lot, even if it's in the low teens or something on a reasonably significant cloud spend, it's going to make a significant difference. So, this is the standard stuff that you would get if you did a Google search, but this is our view. So you'll see 72%. If you look at the cloud service providers, it's actually mentioned in some FinOps Foundation documentation as well. Realistically, as Donald said, aim for it, but don't be disappointed if you're some way short of that. That's to be expected. And then you've got some selections. I'm not going to go through these now because they'll form part of the discussion. But, ideal for continuously run instances or instances that are going to run for a term. Let's put it that way. Savings plans, a lot more coverage, a bit more dynamic, and maybe easier to manage. So, ideal for dynamic and evolving workloads potentially, or disparate resources. Still significant savings. Again, all winds in the direction. Maybe this is achievable, probably less. And discounts, again, vary by product and commitment as they would elsewhere. And Spot, just to make mention of it, because it often gets rolled into the discussions around commitments and savings plans and reserved instances. Well, significant potential savings, best for workloads that are fault tolerant and can manage interruptions. So those would be stateless applications and things like that. Batch processing may be ideal for that potentially, but there are some caveats around that as well. But you need to be aware it's a dynamic market. So understanding that resource can be taken away from you at relatively short notice is really important. So, things that can scale and can manage removal of certain resources are maybe the determining factors for Spot use.
And just one thing on the Spot piece as well, the region that you're in has a massive impact as well, because we've all seen the meme where it shows the beach probably in the UK on a sunny day with everyone jam-packed into it, and that's North Virginia. So the spot market there is ram-packed. But if you go somewhere like Northern California, which wouldn't be as popular, mainly because it's more expensive, but the spot market there is, you have a lot more options in terms of the spot market. So it's kind of hard if your infrastructure is already laid around these regions, but that would have a massive bearing in terms of the effectiveness of the spot market, the region that you're in.
Agreed. Okay, I think I think the conversation is still going on around CLM on the side, so that's great. We'll stick with commitments for the time being. So this was just really to spark a conversation and maybe a thought process around some of the things that you are going to need to consider to successfully manage your commitments, whether they're reserved instances or savings plans. It's definitely front and center in FinOps thinking and forms a big part of the FinOps Foundation's documentation as well. So plenty of great resources there. But if we think about a kind of how, what, when, and where, then there are quite a few things that need to be considered. And Don, would you like to start us?
That'd be great. And just to, I suppose, touch on one of the things you mentioned when you talked about the FinOps Foundation, the survey, the fact that rate optimization commitments, they were higher and now they're down lower. The majority of that is probably the fact that that's table stakes. Like if you're in a FinOps role, the low-hanging fruit, the first thing you do is you buy a savings plan or you buy a couple of RIs, because unlike any other discipline or job I know I've ever had, you can demonstrate your value by going into the console and saying, I bought this, it's saving us this. Am I great? Give me a pay rise. So that's the first thing that everybody does. So that's the how. You go in and you kind of want to determine what is my level of, what's a base level of workloads. Do I cover 60% as an example with a savings plan? Because I know that, okay, there's 40% there that might drop, or I might be, there's talks about repatriation, maybe there's a divestment of one of the BUs. I want to cover myself so I'm not overexposed. But conversely, as Jonathan touched on, maybe you're planning to grow. I suppose the reason a lot of people are in the cloud in the first place is because it'll scale and grow as the business grows without having to order physical hardware and wait on the lead time and the connecting of it. So you want to kind of capture that growth over time. So maybe from that perspective, is 60%, are you leaving some money on the table? So kind of determining what that might be is tricky. And you also want to understand how you buy it, in terms of, do you want to buy no upfront, partial upfront, or all upfront? The reason, in my experience, when I deal with customers, why they wouldn't necessarily go with an all upfront is because you have to talk to the accountants to do that, because you're taking a big chunk of cash and you're kind of bringing the payment for that forward, as opposed to being amortized and applied as the usage takes hold. So no upfront is by far and away the most popular, but you do get another, it's like 2 or 3% for partial, another additional 2 or 3% for an all upfront. So depending on what interest rates are doing, I suppose globally, what your internal treasury department could do with that cash instead. Could they get a return of 5 or 6% themselves, or is doing an all upfront purchase of some of your commitments a better use of your resources? So it's kind of having that discussion in place and looking at the numbers to understand what makes sense, and from a cash flow perspective. So around the how, those are kind of some of the key considerations at a high level.
And on the coverage front, is there a level of coverage that's recommended across all organizations, or is that an organization by organization metric?
It's really hard. Not only does it depend on the organization, it depends on the person and the day, time of day of week. It's kind of that risk, and it's amazing that such a material decision can be made with just a couple of clicks of a button. We're like, I think maybe 70% or 60%. Like, there will be some, you'll have spoken to the different BUs and got a sense of the engineers, what they expect, broad brush. But at the end of the day, it's an estimation. And I suppose the hardest thing to, or probably the worst thing to do, is not do anything, because there's kind of cash on the table. But as you mentioned earlier, Jonathan, you don't want to go over your skis and be overcommitted to a point where you've got underutilization, you're paying for these savings plans and RIs, and not only you're not getting savings for them, you're getting dinged and charged for them. So it depends on which, the devil or the angel on the shoulder, which one is kind of at the steering wheel at the time.
Yes, it's really interesting. We heard a conversation from a consultant just recently at one of our events, and the customer asked, what one thing should I do, if I'm dealing with reservations? And it was quite simple. It was, go out and buy one now. Leave the room and buy something now. Make a commitment, because you will start saving money. So I think that really brought it home to that particular customer. Was, inaction is worse than taking some action in almost every case when it comes to commitments.
And just on that point, one of the things that we see as quite a good strategy is to buy a little bit and often. So, for example, you look in your console and it will recommend to buy, I don't know, $30 an hour of savings plans. But maybe don't buy 30, because you're selling your soul to the cloud provider. Maybe buy $5 or $3 an hour and let it for a month, and then see how that's performed, and buy another $3. And what you're doing is you're balancing that risk and return. You're getting some savings on the board, but you're not overexposing yourself at the same time. You'll also see, I suppose, how it's applying to your usage, and because the chargeback and showback with a lot of this is quite a difficult piece as well, because it's all well and good making the savings, but which BU is benefiting from the savings, and how do you account for all that? So being able to figure that stuff out in a gradual piece, as opposed to, oh, we've been in a dark room for 6 months and this is what we're going to do, and now we're going to implement it. But then how do we charge back or show back? It's kind of more iterative and maybe an easier way to approach it.
Yes, and I'll pick on that particular point and come to that in just a sec, which is how to do that showback, and we'll maybe touch on that a little bit. What I like to do quickly is just kind of go around the how, what, where, and when, and maybe just pull out a few bits, and then we'll circle back to two things. One, I want to touch on the showback and chargeback and getting visibility. I think that's important, and the second one is the approach that's a little bit different by Spot and the Spot Eco service. So just very quickly, what to buy and for how long. I think you've touched on that a little bit. Maybe that incremental buying might be a good way to do it. What to buy is something that can be delivered from the platform. So from Flexera FinOps CCO, that will give you recommendations on what potentially you can buy. Maybe the strategy for approaching that, like Donald said, is a nuance and something that needs some consideration. You'll notice that I've put KPIs everywhere. I think some of those are quite important to think about as well, in terms of having some sort of target. They can change, but if you're looking for some performance, whether it's coverage or return, so savings realized or the amount of coverage compared with your reservable infrastructure, bearing in mind that not everything can have a commitment levied against it, really quite important. And I guess then there's the region piece as well, and some considerations there. I guess so. You made mention of regions at the start, the scope, whether it's shared or single, quite important as well. Do you want to just make maybe a bit of a mention of that one, and then we'll move on in the interest of time?
Sure. Yeah, in terms the where is probably one of the more important ones. So in terms of AWS or Azure or GC, you want to kind of purchase on the master level or the highest level account and have RI sharing turned on, RI and SP sharing turned on for all your accounts. What that means is the commitment that you buy will flow to usage across your entire environment, and that means that you've got more chances of a hit and less chance that it'll go underutilized. So you're kind of broadening what you can potentially cover. So that's quite a good one. And 1 and 3 year is a consideration. The RIs and the SP mix as well is quite a key piece.
Okay, so definitely on the bottom left hand side, research, plan, and then act. Definitely do that. You've got the tools. If you're consuming cloud cost optimization from Flexera, you've got the tools to do that in terms of the research, being able to apply policies for recommendations around reserved instances, savings plans, and so on. Just to pick up on one of the points there, hopefully I can hop straight to this. So this is a view of, essentially we've tried to tie it to a phase from the FinOps Foundation. So this is the operate phase. You've made some purchases of commitments. The graphics don't look great here, I'm afraid, but if you trust me that this is a commitment ID here, within the platform, you're able to essentially create a pivot by dragging various dimensions into a table to be able to sort those. And that allows you to sort by rule-based dimension or by effectively your business unit. So you can start to really view and dig down into who's consuming what commitments and what level of return they should or can be expected to see. So great in terms of showback and in terms of potential benefit distribution. You can start to dig into that in a really meaningful way. meaningful way. And if it's something of interest, or there are any points that have popped up through this conversation today that you would like us to dig into more, this is, all about best practice. We're obviously a provider, so some element of that is using the tooling as well. If you'd like us to dig into a particular aspect of the tool, then we're happy to do so as well. So different manufacturers provide different pieces of information. So we cover both commitment name and commitment ID. You can start to look at that along with all of your business related information, and then start to see in a tabular view that's exportable by commitment name or commitment ID, which elements of the organization are consuming that and receiving benefit, and then be able to export that and potentially show it back in different ways. The other bit that I just wanted to touch on, I guess, is from a spot perspective, you're in a unique position, Donald, that you're looking at lots of organizations and bring a particular mode of operation to commitment management. And if I can just switch over to here, hopefully I'm not, catching you off guard. We've got 7 or so minutes left. I think it maybe is worth, because it comes back to the best practice, although this is a service that we offer, it follows, the best practice. It's hard to do for an individual organization, understand some of that, but maybe if you could touch on this and maybe the next couple of slides that are there as well, that would be great.
Sure thing. So this one is the analogy where you've got a jar and you put in the big rocks and say, is it full? Then the pebbles, then the sand. So you're always kind of adding to fill it up. Commitments work the same way. So a lot of organizations that I'd see, they might have savings plans, and they might have bought them in a gradual fashion, in a layered approach. And that's as good as I see from in-house teams. You've got savings on the board and decent level of coverage. But when it comes to this is AWS specific, but we do something similar around Azure and GC. You've got 3 tools in the tool belt, so you might as well use them, because I suppose with savings plans, if you've got a hammer, everything's a nail. Whereas that's only one part of the puzzle. One of the key parts we use is convertible RIs, and the reason we leverage these as our big rock is because, as the name suggests, they're convertible. They can change, they can expand up and shrink down. So if, for example, after you're with the service and after a couple of months your environment doubles, what we can do is we can just expand up that convertible. We can turn a T3 Nano into 100 M5s as an example, to cover that increase in usage. Conversely, if after a period of time your usage drops, what we can do is we can flatten that convertible. So it gives you a lot more flexibility than you'd necessarily have with a savings plan. Standard RIs are in there because that 72%, that BHAG in terms of the big, hairy, audacious goal of a savings number, that's probably based off a 3-year standard RI. AWS made some changes at the start of last year, 2024, that impacted the standard RIs and the ability to resell them. So that means getting a large portion at that 72% isn't quite feasible, but you can always get a portion of your environment to make sure you're not locked in from that risk perspective. And then the final piece is the savings plan. They're quite important because they cover areas of compute that RIs can't. So they cover ECS, EKS, and Lambda. And you'd be surprised the amount of customers that don't savings plans that cover something outside of EC2, that they cover these services as well. So we use the 3 combined to push that coverage to cover as much as we possibly can within the compute piece. So that's it.
Great stuff.
Donald and Jonathan, not to put both of you on the spot, and I've recently been engaging more in the commitment management side of the house and learning that it's you need an MBA for AWS and Azure to do it right. But can you address kind of the, historically the diminishing rate of return when trying to do this manually was maybe leaving teams focusing on just one particular service, right? Like EC2 or virtual machines. Can you expand a little bit? And I think you started to on your last comment on how this, level of automation opens up to other services as well, and how that diminishing rate of return is maybe pushed off now, or that barrier to entry is maybe removed.
So just so the barrier to entry from our perspective, I suppose it's relative low hanging fruit, and the way I always kind of put it is usage optimization. You save 100% because you're turning stuff off that you're not using. That can't be outsourced because you need business specific insights and information. You need to be talking to engineering teams. Rate optimization can be outsourced because you're reading the data, you're using the tooling and the automation to get you that incremental benefit, and we're saving on the usage that you've got. If you spend that time, because time is the enemy and time is finite, so if you spend that time doing usage optimization, saving those 100% and not worrying about that reducing usage, because the managed service of something like us will taper down your commitments as your usage drops. You're kind of getting the best of both worlds, because it's kind of, you don't want to be locked in. You want to give yourself flexibility, but at the same time, there's only so many hours in the day, and it's just trying to strike that build versus buy balance is kind of difficult.
Thank you.
And I guess just to close out, I think Eve might want to make a comment at the end, and we'll go back to the Gartner piece as well. But just if I move to the I guess, not that one. Well, that one's important as well, but I think we're out of time. So this one, I guess, is a sum up. I know it says AWS Managed Services Commitment Management, but this is a good practice guide, effectively, isn't it? To, whether it's AWS, Azure, GCP, in terms of engagement, layered purchasing, and strategic, it is your mode of operation, but actually it's a good fit for anybody approaching commitment management.
Yes, yeah. Some of this is nuanced because this is covering the managed services within AWS, like the cancel and rebuy, that last piece, but definitely the first two, like understanding the business and buying little bits at it. It's kind of like eating an elephant, one bite at a time. If you try and do it all together, it's just going to be overwhelming. So to do so, and the one thing I would suggest as well is, if possible, buy a small convertible RI, a 1 and a 3 year. It'll cost about $20 a month. It might save you $3 or $4 a month. But what it means is you've planted the seed, and that will build flexibility into, it's like making a small investment or buying a share. Over time, that becomes more valuable. So something worth considering.
Great stuff. Thank you very much, everybody. I'm just checking to make sure we're kind of up to date in the chat as well. I think we are. And Eve, unless there's anything else, I guess it's a good opportunity now to, I think we're at time. So just remind you again, if you can take a shot of the QR code, we would really appreciate your feedback. It helps Gartner, it helps your peers if they're considering different solutions, and we would be very grateful for your feedback in general, not just for Gartner, but also the way it feeds back into our organization. So that would be great. Thank you very much. Eve, anything to close out with? Nope, all good. In that case, thank you very much for your time and attention. I believe this is going to go up on the Flexera site at some point, so feel free to come back and catch that. If you would like to reach out to any of us, please do so, and post questions in the chat. I think it stays open for a little bit after the call's shut, and we will do our best to reach out to you. Thank you very much. Thank you.